Howdy folks, Rig Doctor here, Uncle Mason. Today we're going to be talking about how to properly power multiple pedals off of one single power output. Many people ask me how I can power a greater number of pedals than there are outputs from a power supply. And the way that I do this is by daisy chaining or creating a Y cable or splitting off from one output so that we can have multiple pedals being powered by a single power source. There's a myth that every pedal needs to have its own output. The reality is most of our distortion devices and overdrive devices are perfectly happy sharing power, and there's not going to be any added noise by doing that. I hope you enjoy. Follow me to the home shop. We're going to get started. My name is Mason Marangella. I build rigs for the industry's top professionals. Now I'm teaching guitarists how to build rigs like the pros, with DIY tips, easy mods, and all the tricks of the trade. I am the Rig Doctor. Now, many of us have been in this very position where we have a bunch of pedals and we don't have a power supply that has enough output for all. Just look at this one right now that I'm building for my buddy Anthony Best. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, steel string under there 9, Ultraphonics 10, Tone Secret 11, Friedman BEOD 12. So all in all, we have 12 pedals here. And we have the Strymon Zuma here, and this only has 9 outputs. Ordinarily, I would see people go to another supply, either a bigger supply, or they would add on another supply. If it was the Strymon stuff, for example, they might use an Ojai or some sort of addendum power supply to reach all the necessary outputs. But on this board, we don't need to add another power supply because we can share outputs on some pedals. And I'm going to show you exactly how you decide on that, and which pedals are good candidates and which are not. So here's our rig, and I have the Strymon Zuma here. So we need to figure out how to put 12 pedals into these 9 outputs of the Zuma. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. To start, it's important to have the right tools. One critical tool to be able to combine power effectively is a MILLIAMP reader. That's a tool that will allow you to measure how much power each one of your pedals is drawing. And I like to use that so when I combine pedals, I'm not exceeding the total milliamp maximum of each output. For example, on the Zuma, I know that each of the power outputs only puts out 500 milliamps, or half an amp. So I'm not going to combine pedals that exceed that amount. And typically it will be way under that, because the type of pedals that I recommend combining to stay noise-free are typically analog and typically of the distortion or overdrive variety. Now, because I don't have the True Tone milliamp reader, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. I have a multimeter, and I've set up a test rig to allow me to read the current draw of each one of the pedals. In most cases, it's not a good idea to combine digital type pedals. On this pedal board, it would be things like the Strymons. Even if we had the milliamps available to power 2 of these on one, it's typically unadvisable from a noise standpoint to do this. On this rig, the type of pedals that we're going to want to combine are things like the bass compressor, Unicorn Blood, Vertex Boost, Steel String, Ultraphonics, Tone Secret, Friedman BEOD. Let's see which ones are actually good candidates. I'm going to read the current draw of each one of these and decide which ones are going to make the best candidates for sharing, and then we're actually going to test it. Because sometimes, even though it looks good on paper, in practice, it doesn't actually work. We want to make sure that we don't have any noisy combinations before we go to wire the board, so let's measure it out. So we're going to start with the first pedal, the Unicorn Blood. I'm going to go ahead and take my 9 volt out, and I'm getting my reading already. I have 3.8 milliamps, so I'm just going to make a note of that. I'll take some blue tape, I'll put it on here, and I'll put 3.8 milliamps. This way I know exactly how much current it requires, and I'll go to the next one. I'm going to continue the same process with all of them, and we'll see what we have. So we have them all out here, everything that we're going to need for the pedal board. We know all the currents, so now we can know what to combine. So you'll notice here that most of these didn't draw very much. In fact, based on the current alone, we could combine all these off of one output. But that presents some problems in terms of finding a connector that can actually fit this many DC power cables into one actual plug. So usually I never combine more than 3 on one output, but usually I try to keep it to 2. There are a lot of different ways to combine 2 pedals into one output. Typically what you see is one output coming out of, say, a Boss tuner, and then a bunch of linking cables that connect all to each other to bring power to all the other pedals. Now that's one way you could wire this particular type of cable. However, for neatness, I prefer to wire this all at the pump. By that I mean I'm going to solder it into the physical connector that connects to the power supply and not bring it from one pedal to the next. I think it looks cleaner. I also think that it's more reliable to do it this way. To show you how to wire a custom Y cable that have straight ends on one side and right angles on the other. I'm going to cut away the two straight ends and I'm going to fuse these together and wire the shield to shield and the hot to hot, and then I'm going to wire it into one plug. Here it is. To wire this, I'm going to be using Kobicon connectors. I'm going to link these in the description below. Here are my Strymon cables. I'm going to cut off the straight side because I prefer the right angles going into the pedals over here. So I'm going to go ahead, cut these guys off. Then I'm going to use my wire strippers, and I'm going to use about a 2.6 millimeter. And as you can see, I stripped off about an inch and a half there. You see these two black pieces of the cable? I'm going to strip those away all the way down to the hilt. I'm going to expose them and then I'm going to braid them together. I'm taking about a 2.2 gauge. I'm taking all the way to the hilt and I'm pulling it off. And as you can see, I've totally exposed the ground wire completely. I'm going to repeat on the other cable. Same wire, using the same gauge for the stripping. Pull it off. Now I have both together. I'm going to take them and I'm going to braid them together. I'm going to tin this. That just means I'm going to put a little solder on it just to hold it together, and then I'm going to move over to the red part. So all I'm doing here is just tinning this. This is just a fancy way of saying I'm sort of pre-soldering it. So here's the Kobicon plug, and it's completely disassembled. You can see that there's a nice tab here to solder the shield to, and there's another nice tab on the top to solder the center conductor. So we've already pre-tinned our shield, but we need to do the center conductor. So I just like to use the housing to kind of measure how much I'm going to need. Now because we have two cables going into one plug, or ordinarily it would just be one of these cables, we're probably going to end up cutting away some of this tab because we're not going to be able to use it for strain relief because the cable thickness is too great to crimp. So I'm kind of doing a visual measurement here to see how much of the red actually needs to be exposed, and it looks to me like it's not a whole lot. So I'm going to go and do a test cut and then I'm going to see if it fits. Alright, so here's my test cut. I think it's right about here, and usually I'll underestimate a little bit in case I need to go further. I can, and I didn't overcut it and have too much exposed. I'm going to tie this together. I'm going to do another visual measurement here, and it looks like that's about right. It looks like I'm going to have enough space to wire the ground. I'm going to have plenty of the center conductor sticking through the top of the solder tab on the very top, so I think that this is going to be good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tin this. I'm going to trim it down a little bit, and then we'll see what we got. Now I'm going to tin the center conductor here. Alright, so we got this tinned. I'm going to sort of quick measure it again, and then I'm going to cut off the excess that we're not going to need. So I've clipped my 2.1 millimeter barrel connector, and I'm just going to compare what my exposed cable is versus how much space I have to assemble. Now as I mentioned, we probably have a little bit too much of this solder tab available, so I'm actually going to cut off the rest of it that is going to be unused. So I'm literally just taking my clippers and I'm just cutting that piece off. We can't crimp the cable, so it's not going to help us have any more secure of a connection. I'm going to pre-tin the lug here that we're going to be soldering to. Just got a little bit of solder on there, and that's just going to help everything flow a little bit better. And I can see already that we can cut off quite a bit of the hot here. Alright, I've soldered that end, but now I need to solder the ground. And all I need to do is just solder the shield here to the ground lug. We have a little extra cable, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut that away. And I'm just going to get in and out here. I'm just going to touch it very quickly. Bam. That's it. We have two of the red center conductors going into the tip here, and then we have the two grounds, or the shield, going into the ground lug there. So we have two cables going into one. I'm going to put back on the plastic housing. I'm going to zip tie it so it stays together nice and tight, and then we'll be ready to test it with our pedals. Now you'll notice on the back of the Kobicon housing that there's sort of like a little lip on that. And when I put two cables into one, I actually need to cut it away because it interferes with the cable being able to exit. So I'm just going to show you how I do that real quick. I use a cutter that has a flat end. so that we have a nice straight cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, I'm going to straight cut once here, I'm going to straight cut once on the other side, fold it back, and then I'm going to straight cut one more time. And now I have a nice area to let the cable come through. Again, here's my completed cable. I now have my housing. That looks great. Now I'm going to zip tie it to make sure that the housing stays together. Taking my zip tie, feeding it through. So we got two there. I'm just going to pull them tight so that there's no play in the zip tie. And then I can use my same cutter. Cut them nice and straight. And voila. There we are. We have a nicely assembled power cable that's going to go to 2 pedals, and it's just got one output. So this is going to plug into the power supply, and then these 2 ends that correspond with it will plug into the respective pedals that are combining power. So I have my Y cable essentially, or my power splitter, or whatever you want to call it, my 2-into-1 or my daisy chain. I'm going to go into the very first output of the Strymon, which is 9 volts at 500 milliamps. I'm going to do a few tests with each one of the pedals, and I'm really just listening for noise when they come on, anything that's out of the ordinary. If they all work together, I'm going to start with the combination that I think is going to be the best and see if it works. If it does, we'll just go right ahead, and if not, then we'll start making some changes. So hopefully by the end of today, you learned how to make a daisy chain or a Y cable or a splitter or whatever you want to call it to allow you to put multiple pedals off of one output. I showed you how to test it, I showed you how to wire the cable, and I showed you how to get the milliamp readings off of everything. I've linked the products that you need in order to repeat these same tests and do it for yourself at home. I hope you feel confident to combine power on pedals where there isn't any difference. I'm going to list below also the types of pedals that you generally don't want to combine. Talking about digital pedals, as mentioned before, things with clocks in them like tremolo or chorus or phaser. And I hope that you can apply these same principles at home so that you're able to figure out how to combine power on pedals and not have to use a bunch of power supplies. All these guys are using all these power supplies and they don't need to. They could very easily do it with just one high quality power supply like the Strymon Zuma or like some of the ones that I've listed in the description below. If you don't feel confident soldering, I'm going to also link for Voodoo Lab splitter cables for power that will allow you to do ostensibly the same thing and already has it pre-made for you. So that's for those of you that don't want to solder yourself. You can still use the milliamp reader from True Tone and figure this stuff out, but you don't have to worry about any of the soldering. So that'll be available to you as well. Thank you so much for watching. Do the things, like, subscribe, leave us a comment. Tell me what other videos you want to see as far as DIY stuff like this for tips and tricks. I'm the Rig Doctor. Adios.